In my last video, I met up with the best gimbaler I know to find out why my RS3 Pro footage was shaky and bouncy, while his looked like this. After comparing our techniques, gimbal settings, etc., the only notable difference was the fact that his camera had IBIS and my camera did not. Once we disabled IBIS on his FX3, something he never does, that footage was also quite shaky. Luckily, I got a bunch of really great feedback in the comments, naturally ran a bunch of more tests in my apartment, and bought some new gear. And in this video, I'll go into how I'm able to get footage that I'm actually satisfied with out of my RS3 Pro. Welcome to Sounded Out Films. My name is Eric. I am a Boston-based filmmaker and C70 aficionado. Let's get into it. A common thread in the comments last time was that people are using SuperSmooth. Everything we tested was in the normal mode. I posted a poll in the YouTube community tab to see how many of you are using SuperSmooth, and it turned out to be a pretty even split, with just about half of the people responding saying that they use it all of the time, and the other half never using it, with a very small percentage actually enabling it as recommended by DJI, which is just in fast-moving scenarios. Personally, I would not qualify those mailbox walk tests as fast-moving, but we probably should have still tried it because it would have definitely helped. Testing it in my apartment and on this soccer field, it definitely made the footage noticeably less jittery, although not quite IBIS level smooth. Let's go back to the regular footage as a reminder of how shaky it was. Now back to SuperSmooth. Now what if we put warp stabilizer on this SuperSmooth? This is the goal for me, and we're not quite there only in camera yet. However, I wouldn't be surprised if I handed this footage into an editor and they did not stabilize it in post. I might just be more picky, and I probably would, but I don't think it's completely necessary the way that it is in the regular mode. So now naturally I'm thinking, should I just use SuperSmooth mode all the time, even if I'm not fast moving? I contacted DJI's customer support. They said it's not recommended, and with a really light camera setup, it could actually introduce jitters if the motors were too strong. But if I'm getting smoother results, like with a heavy camera like the C70, they said by all means, go for it. They also suggested strengthening the motors manually after you auto-tune. They said hypothetically, if the motors start to shake when you get to 40, bring it down to 32. So upon running the same apartment walk with the auto-tune settings and then with the higher settings, maybe there is something marginally better there, but it definitely didn't move the needle enough for me to take the time to do that slow process every time I change lenses. If anything, I might just do a uniform 10 notches up on each axis after calibrating each time. Maybe I'll try that in the future. When it comes to other settings within the app, I prefer the follow speed to be on slow and the deadband to be on high. This feels most organic to me because a high deadband will eliminate any false starts that you didn't mean to make. You turn, and then slowly the gimbal turns. And the follow speed on slow ramps smoothly. You could go into custom and make the deadband even higher than the high default, or the follow speed even slower than the slow default. I tried that, and even though it was very smooth, I felt like I wasn't agile enough to land the camera where I wanted it to be in a timely manner. So with those settings dialed in, all is well and good while I'm panning and tilting around, but we are here today to talk about walking with the gimbal, which I was still not satisfied with. So I spent a little money, and I do mean a little, and picked up the Canon RF 35mm stabilized lens. I didn't own any lenses with IS except for my 100mm macro, which isn't exactly a gimbal lens. None of my Sigma primes or, of course, vintage lenses have any stabilization built in. I was optimistic because IBIS really helped out with that mirrorless camera, so maybe Lens IS can help out with my cinema camera. I picked this particular lens because it was one of the most affordable that Canon makes with IS. It's actually even cheaper than the EF version with IS. And it's extremely light, which makes operating the gimbal a lot easier, so I was pumped to see if this $400 purchase could solve all of my issues. Before we get to those tests, I think there's two things I need to differentiate: shakes and bounces. In my first video, I didn't really dive into the differences between the two, but they are separate problems. The shaking is just the motors not really totally stabilizing the shocks that your body is sending into the camera by walking. The bouncing, however, is different. That is a Z-axis issue because our 3-axis gimbal cannot stabilize for up-down movement. Hence the emphasis on the heel-toe ninja walk most people talk about. Warp stabilizer can also somewhat solve this. It does crop in slightly and can keep your frame centered. However, if there's significant parallax between your foreground and your background caused by your Z-axis bounce, there's nothing it can do about that. And my assumption is going to lens IS is that the jitters will be solved, but that Z-axis bounce will still be present. But I headed to this soccer field to verify. Here's that lens with IS off in regular mode, and it's pretty damn shaky. Now let's put it in super smooth. It got like 50% better, I'd say. But now let's enable lens IS. I'd say this is acceptable. It's not IBIS level, but it's looking pretty good. And I'm pretty satisfied with this. It did not exceed my expectations. It did not take away that Z-axis bounce. You can definitely tell when focusing on the net that it does shift up and down compared to the buildings in the background. That's why I set this shot up this way, is because the Z-axis bounce is accentuated whenever you have a strong foreground and background element. IS can't fix that, but what it can fix is the jitters, and for the most part, it did. I look at using a gimbal as a battle to get to 90% smooth. Properly balancing your gimbal and using proper form will probably get you like 60% of the way there. If you go super wide with your focal length, you're probably up to like 70% smooth. If you can go into slow motion, bam, you're at 100%. However, if you need to shoot in 24, and you also want a higher focal length, you're back down to 60, and you have to crawl your way back up to 90 with your own custom equation based off whatever gear you have. Good reliable IBIS, like in the FX3, can easily get you another 40% of the way there. But if you only have digital IS like me with the C70, it only really works for wide-angle lenses because the more telephoto you get, the more likely you are to get tracking glitches, as we discussed in the last video. So I would turn that off, and I still have a bit more to climb. As I recently discovered, I could use a lens like my new RF with IS, and I think that just barely gets me another 30% of the way there towards the acceptable 90 threshold. But if the shoot calls for nicer glass, then I have to get creative with how I can add little bits to that formula. I can calibrate in SuperSmooth mode. Maybe that'll get me to like 75%. I can increase my stiffness after calibrating, and I could add lens support, which I should be doing all the time anyway. I can grab the gimbal closer to the head instead of down by the feet, which I sometimes do. I can practice my heel-toe method, and if all else fails, I can stabilize in post. Hopefully with that, you can get to 90% with whatever camera, lens, or even gimbal you have. It was my goal for 2022 to get to 10,000 subs, and it looks like that is not going to happen. But if you want to help me get close anyway, consider hitting that button. I'd appreciate it. And if you have any other gimbal tips that I did not mention that can help me get to 90% or higher in my equation, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear them.